All right, so it seems like you're hitting a wall trying to move your money between your bank and Coinbase.
Yeah.
They claim they're fully compliant with MiCA, but the banks are still giving you the runaround.
Yeah, definitely a pain.
It's a real head scratcher. That's why we're doing this deep dive today. We've got an expert here to break down the legal maze. We've got some analysis that really digs into what's going on and maybe what you can do about it.
It really is interesting, isn't it? You'd think MiCA being in place would have smoothed things over.
Right. I mean, what's the point?
Exactly. Like MiCA, the Markets in Crypto Assets Regulation, was put in place specifically to standardize the rules for crypto across the entire EU. It covers stuff like licensing for exchanges, how they manage customer funds, and all the safeguards to prevent money laundering.
Right. All the basics.
Yeah, and Coinbase has clearly gone through all the hoops, checked all the boxes to be fully compliant.
So in theory, banks should be more at ease dealing with them, right?
Exactly. Compliance with MiCA should, at least theoretically, calm a lot of the nerves that banks have always had about crypto. You know, stuff like security and transparency.
Right, the classic concerns.
Yeah, but in reality, we're still seeing these roadblocks from banks.
So what's the deal?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. Banks usually point to internal risk policies, anti-money laundering obligations, or even, whispers from regulators.
Unofficially.
But the analysis we're looking at today raises a really big question. Are banks actually overstepping by basically shutting out a compliant exchange?
Interesting.
This could potentially clash with some major EU legal principles.
Okay, hold on. Let's break this down. We're talking about actual legal violations here. What principles are we talking about?
Oh, yeah, we're talking big stuff, like Article 56 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union.
Oh, wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it deals with the free provision of services across the EU. If a business is legally operating in one member state, another member state's banks shouldn't be able to just block their services just because.
So, like, imagine Belgium suddenly decides they don't want any goods from France, even though those goods are perfectly legal under EU rules.
Exactly. A perfect analogy. And then there's Article 102, which bans abusing a dominant market position.
Right, makes sense.
And banks, by their very nature, hold huge power in the financial world. If they're using that power to unfairly squeeze out a competitor, even one in a new disruptive field like crypto, that raises some serious red flags.
Definitely. Makes sense. Anything else we should be thinking about here? Legally, I mean.
Oh, yeah, there's a couple more big ones, like there's a potential infringement on the freedom to conduct business and the right to property, both protected by the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. By blocking access to funds on a compliant exchange, banks could be seen as, well, stopping you from doing legitimate business and accessing your own assets.
Wow, this is pretty serious stuff. So basically what you're saying is these banks, even with all their risk talk and regulatory concerns, might actually be on shaky legal ground.
Potentially, yeah. The analysis also brings up the principle of effectiveness in EU law. So basically, if MiCA isn't actually being applied in the real world, its whole purpose is kind of pointless.
Right, it defeats the purpose.
Exactly. And that's where individual member states, like, well, I assume you're in Belgium.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, so Belgium becomes super important.
You're reading my mind. I was just looking at that part of the analysis. It mentions this thing called the Frankovich principle. What's that all about?
Frankovich, yeah, that's a heavy hitter in EU law. It essentially allows people to claim compensation for damages caused by a member state not properly implementing EU law.
So theoretically, I could sue Belgium.
Well, it can definitely be tough, but the possibility is there.
That's pretty wild.
It is. If Belgium, through their actions or even inaction, is seen as blocking MiCA from working properly and causing real harm, well, there might be grounds for legal action.
So it's not just banks being overly cautious. There could be real consequences for countries that don't get this right.
That's the key takeaway. It's complicated with high stakes. The analysis really pushes for smoother integration of MiCA with the current banking system across all EU countries.
Okay, so just make it work.
Basically, banks, regulators, policymakers, they all need to work together and make sure there's a consistent and fair approach to crypto businesses across the whole EU.
A level playing field.
Exactly, where the rules are clear and everyone's on the same page.
This has been super helpful, really eye-opening stuff, but I can't help but wonder, what does this actually mean for someone like me who's just trying to use a legal platform like Coinbase? Do I have to just sit and wait for the courts to figure all this out, or are there other ways to go? What about like decentralized finance solutions? Could that be a way to totally bypass these bank roadblocks? It's Definitely something to think about.
Absolutely. A lot to consider.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been quite the journey.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Definitely given us all a lot to think about.
For sure.
Until next time.
See you then.